For a long time after Ghost of Tsushima released, it was speculated upon that when Sucker Punch made the inevitable sequel, if it would continue to follow Tsushima's protagonist, Jin Sakai, or move on to a new era in character entirely. Obviously last year is when we first learned it would be the latter, which I was initially a bit disappointed by because I thought Jin made for a great protagonist and felt there were still some potential future stories with him to be told. But at the same time, I understood the decision to make this series more of an anthology, with different protagonists and settings for each game to keep things fresh. Ghost of Tsushima's ending was also very conclusive, and although they could have continued to expand on Jin's story, I respected Sucker Punch's decision to leave it where it was, tied up in a neat bow. Even just replaying the game a few months ago, I felt it lent potentially even more emotional weight to that ending, knowing that is truly the end of Jin's story. However, all that being said, I think a lot of us agreed it would have been nice to have an idea as to how Jin spent the rest of his days to give us some more finality and closure. The Stormblade mission in Ghost of Yotei does just that. Not only giving us that closure for Jin's character, but what ultimately feels like the perfect tribute to Ghost of Tsushima as a whole. I am still working on my Ghost of Yotei review, but I really wanted to make a video specifically about this mission, because as someone who considers Ghost of Tsushima to be one of their favorite games, I absolutely loved it and there's so much to talk about. From the references and Easter eggs to the music, and of course that final chapter to Jin's life. The mission begins with Atsu's search for the mysterious Stormblade, which any Tsushima player would immediately know is Jin's, at a forgotten shrine. It's there where you encounter an old Inari shrine, like the many we honored on Tsushima, and a distinct looking fox to lead you through the rest of the mission. It's never directly stated, but it's pretty obvious to me that this is Jin's spirit guiding us through the fox, like in Tsushima, where it was implied that the spirit of Jin's father was guiding him through the wind, while his mother was guiding him through the gold birds. And there's a similar implication with Atsu's parents in Yotei as well. So it's perfectly within reason of these games to believe this is Jin, especially knowing the connection he had with the foxes on Tsushima. It gives this really nice, heartwarming feeling knowing Jin is right alongside you throughout this mission. The tale as a whole does such a good job at making his presence felt, even though you of course never actually see or hear him. The Jin fox then leads you to an old haiku under a red tree. Red was the main color of Ghost of Tsushima, similar to how yellow is for Yotei. It was on the cover, and there were lots of red leaves and trees like this one at Jin's family cemetery. The red is meant to symbolize Jin's journey as the ghost and giving into his emotions. That's why you got the red dye for the ghost armor if you chose to spare Lord Shimura and complete his transformation into the ghost. It was a nice visual touch to include both here and at Jin's resting place. The second you see it, it takes your mind back to Tsushima. Same with the pampas grass in front of Jin's house later on. Atsu then recites Jin's very somber haiku. There's a sadness and loneliness to it, but also pride and satisfaction that Jin did the right thing. Being isolated and away from home, but proud that the sacrifices he made saved his people. That's basically what his character was all about, so it's perfectly befitting. And just the haiku itself was nostalgic, especially since there aren't any in Yotei. They were essentially replaced with the sumie paintings, as you get the headbands as rewards for those instead. I kinda missed the haikus, so that was nice, and the Tsushima haiku theme playing was just the cherry on top. The next stop on the trip down memory lane is when you reach Jin's Shinobi Den, full of some iconic memorabilia from Ghost of Tsushima, like Taka's grappling hook, rest in peace Taka, a horse's saddle with arrows in it, rest in peace horse, I think I'm still emotionally scarred from that one, and of course, Jin's clan Sakai helmet. Tsushima only came out 5 years ago, but seeing these items all aged and worn down actually made me feel the in-game passage of time. It's such a cool feeling because we were there. We know the context of all this, we lived it. The players have gotten to cheat time, while to Atsu, it's all just ancient history and relics of a distant past. It feels very celebratory and rewarding to those who played Tsushima and get to basically go through this museum of callbacks. I swear, I was that Leonardo DiCaprio meme through this whole mission. I was just so giddy, pointing out things I recognized, even though literally nobody was in the room with me. It felt like opening a time capsule. I thought they did a really good job creating that feeling. As you then make your way into the cavern, you come across the Stormblade itself, in some excellent condition might I add, all things considered. I love how Ugetsu at the beginning of the tale described it as containing the power of an unstoppable storm, because as we know, Jin in the game was the personification of the storms that wiped out the real Mongolian invasions of Tsushima. However, before we can claim the blade for ourselves, a group of Nine-Tails spring an ambush and steal it, leading us to being reunited with the Jin Fox and the home of the first shinobi. Confirmation that in the Ghost universe, Jin was the first shinobi, and his methods as the Ghost were so effective that he inspired this new path and way of fighting. He clearly had a big impact on the Nine-Tails as well, who seemed to sort of idolize him, as they were well aware of his legend, the Stormblade, and even tried to replicate his Wolfsbane poison, which makes for another cool connecting thread between the narratives of these two games. Like I said earlier, the pampas grass is another visual motif synonymous with Ghost of Tsushima. It's incredible that just a field of grass can immediately take you back to that game, and I like how when you walk through it, Atsu will reach down and touch it like Jin did. There's just so much care and attention to detail put into this mission. Sucker Punch for sure knew how important this one was to the fans of the first game. Inside the house is a herbalist set where Jin presumably made his poisons, the burned Clan Shimura adoption papers, which I don't know how Jin got his hands on. Shimura dropped them into the fire when Jin was arrested, so I always just assumed they completely burned up, but I guess somehow Jin or one of his allies went back and recovered them. The logistics on that are a little confusing, but still a cool callback. And there's also Jin's flute that was passed down to him from his mother, something Atsu actually has in common with Jin, with her mother's shamisen. By far the most implicative piece of memorabilia in the mission though is Yuna's dagger, which is sitting right in front of what appears to be drawings from a child on the wall. It's left ambiguous, and I suppose up to some interpretation of what that means, but it seems to imply that Yuna joined Jin and Ezo and they had a child. Now, we never saw Jin and Yuna's relationship become a full-on romance in Ghost of Tsushima, but there were some pretty clear romantic undertones to their dynamic if you paid attention, especially in the third act. And Yuna even brings up the idea of them just leaving together right before they launch their final offensive on the Mongols.
I have to stop the Khan.
No, you don't. We could find a boat, sail somewhere quiet, while your uncle fights his samurai war.
You could tell there was something there, but Sucker Punch kept it subtle and didn't have it become a main focus of the story, which I always really liked. It was a great dynamic and fun to watch develop, but there were some more pressing issues and things to be taken care of, so there was no need to force this love story front and center. It would have felt out of place. But knowing that once Tsushima was safe and they were forced to leave, they could settle down and start a family, is, in my opinion at least, a very satisfying conclusion for both of their characters. For Yuna, knowing that Jin was the only person she had left after losing Taka, and for Jin, who sacrificed so much for the people of Tsushima and suffered so many tragedies in his life, knowing he got some semblance of a happy ending is very comforting and fulfilling. Although this implication did confuse me at first, because the haiku from earlier seems to contradict this, as Jin wrote about being alone and separated from friends. And at the end of Ghost of Tsushima, Jin already had Yuna's dagger in his house, so that alone doesn't necessarily imply that Yuna lived there with him, but putting those childlike drawings behind the dagger on the wall is a very conscious choice. I find it very hard to believe that's a convenience. It's meant to imply something. Plus, what reason, aside from her being dead, would Yuna have to stay on Tsushima? She would also be hunted by the shogunate for her involvement with the Ghost. I mean, Lord Shimura blamed her for Jin's transformation into the Ghost, even though she was really just the catalyst. We all know Jin always had that in him, as shown in those flashback scenes to his childhood, but she was still the Ghost's biggest accomplice, and as she says, Jin was the only person left she cared for. There'd be no reason for her to not go unless she literally couldn't. And as for Jin as well, it makes sense that he would start a family with Yuna because of one of his final scenes with Sensei Ishikawa, where he warns Jin to not isolate himself and push people away like he did.
Family is more important.
Sensei?
Don't become like me.
So for Jin to just completely disregard that advice not only doesn't make sense, but would make for a very unsatisfying conclusion to his arc. What I personally think might have happened is Jin left Tsushima on his own for Ezo, for then Yuna to join him at a later date, where they then eventually had a child. Therefore, the haiku he wrote was from when he was still alone. Or perhaps he meant alone as in regards to the rest of his friends and allies, who knows. To me, that just makes the most sense and makes for a more satisfying direction. Again, it's all left quite ambiguous and open-ended, which I think is a good thing. It leaves some room for interpretation and allows players to fill in the blanks on what they imagine Jin's ideal ending to be. The bottom line is, Jin left Tsushima sometime after the second Mongolian invasion, as we now have confirmation that Jin took part in that one as well, as written on the Stormblade's description, and Oshima Coast in Ezo was his final resting place, under, once again, a beautiful red tree. I really enjoyed this final boss fight. First of all, what a venue. Dueling in front of Jin's grave gave me chills, and the sword thief wielding the Stormblade actually using our moveset from Tsushima with the different katana stances gave me the biggest grin. I can now sympathize with the Mongols though. Jin's moveset is so annoying to try and defend with all the kicks and twirls. What a pain, especially on lethal. But once the thief is dead and the blade is in our hands, we can use the Dance of Wrath from Tsushima, which was a very welcome surprise to me. The Stormblade isn't just a sentimental cosmetic, but actually gives us one of Jin's moves as well. Love it. The final cutscene with Jin's grave and the revealing of his ghost mask buried beneath the red leaves was the chef's kiss of it all though. His theme playing and the way the leaves reveal the mask almost feels like Jin himself is urging Atsu to take it. It's the perfect button end to Jin's tale and passing of the torch from one ghost to the next. I'm really thrilled with how this mission was handled. Like I said, it feels like the perfect tribute to Ghost of Tsushima. Fan service in the best way possible. And although I might always be a little bummed we more than likely won't play as Jin again, though never say never, I'm glad we were able to get this closure with his character and give a proper farewell. Thank you Jin Sakai for the memories. He was a friend and hero to some, but a ghost to all. May you rest in peace, my friend.